Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah Mudd, and I am the president of the Young Friends of the Missouri Historical Society. We've hit 6 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and start intros so people can kind of jump on here over the next minute or two and not miss too much. I'd like to welcome you to When the Sky Comes Down, Historic St. Louis Tornadoes. And our presenter today will be Amanda Clark. So there she is. She joined us now. um, so if you would like some more information about the Young Friends, we are young adults and professionals who belong to the Historical Society, and the group fosters an interest in the St. Louis region's past and creates ways to get involved in that history's preservation and protection. So if you're in your 20s, your 30s, or your 40s, all you have to do is become a member of the Missouri Historical Society and you join. It's a free add-on to your membership. So by becoming a Young Friend, you get the chance to meet other young people from across the region and share your interest in history. You can experience exciting social, educational, and networking events, give back to your community, and get some behind the scenes access with special tours. So if you have any more questions, you can send an email to youngfriends@mohistory.org or contact Rebecca McBride. And her phone number, if you have a pen and paper handy, is 314-454-3164. And if you want to stay in the know, sign up for our regular newsletter and register for our other upcoming events. And so with that, I would love to tell you a little bit about today's event. So let's see here. We are going to be using historic maps, photographs, and eyewitnesses accounts to explore the historic St. Louis tornadoes of 1896, 1927, and 1959. We'll see how each of the tragedies left their mark on the landscape here locally and how those effects are still felt today. So along the way, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat there at the bottom, and I will be happy to relay those to Amanda as we go along. That tends to be the easiest way to submit everything and kind of control the flow of conversation so things aren't getting lost.
All right.
And
you ready to start?
With that, I will turn it over to Amanda and she can introduce herself and get us going.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is one of my very favorite topics to talk about. So this is always, I get to talk about lots of fun things, but this is my favorite, and I'll talk about why in just a minute. Just introduce who I am. I am not from St. Louis. I am a transplant. I moved here about 17 years ago. And for about 12 of those 17 years, I've been talking about St. Louis history, either walking down the street or on a bus or now virtual. So I work for the Missouri Historical Society. I run a new program called CSTL Tours that is a full schedule of walking tours all over the city. We have several every single week. If you're not familiar with them, today I was in the Central West End this morning leading a women's history tour. This weekend we have several tours throughout the city, and that's going on every week all year long. And then in June we'll start having bus tours that take us to all kinds of crazy corners of the city and tell the more complex full history of the city without the touristy stuff. We get into the real nitty gritty things, and those all have themes and are theme based versus location based. And that's my job. My job is to point at things and talk about things. And today I'm going to point at things with my little cursor as we move through. So, and as she mentioned, you can put questions in the Q&A. I'm that rare, I like to think I'm rare, Zoom presenter who loves questions as I move along, and I will check as we move. So instead of waiting till the end, which at the end we can ask questions about any St. Louis history stuff. But as we move through, throw questions in there and I will check them as we move between topics. So normally on our virtual tours, which we do on Friday nights, we set it up a little differently so people can converse and talk throughout the tours. But because it's a webinar, you can put it in the Q&A, but make it conversational. Ask me any kind of random thing, and I will keep pace with it and keep checking that. All right, so how I get to talk about natural disasters. So I grew up with a fascination, like a lot of people, with natural disasters. Some people are really into serial killers or true crime, things like that kind of tend to get, appeal to certain groups. I was fascinated with natural disasters and aliens, but I can't really do much with that yet. I grew up in West Tennessee, which is a part of Tennessee and a part of the country where you are raised understanding that the sky might kill you at any point. And yesterday I was looking at a map of my home state, and just in my county alone, there have been 30 deadly tornadoes since 1950, like just in my one little place. And they would kill like a dozen people at a time. And so that was a pretty normal occurrence and something that we always lived with. We were also lived with the impending doom of earthquakes because we were right about 20 miles south of where the New Madrid, the 1811, 1812 New Madrid faults occurred, or New Madrid earthquakes occurred. And so that was part of the local lore and how that had affected the landscape, and also where you could go and ride earthquake simulators at a state park nearby. And then in 1991, there was a man, and if any of you remember him, Robert Browning, he predicted an earthquake and people believed him. And the whole country was like watching the New Madrid fault because he predicted this big earthquake that didn't happen. But we got out of school that day. Like they wouldn't even, it was, the whole city shut down, or the whole town shut down. So there's that. I was raised around, and also there were rivers right on the Mississippi River, which flooded and could take away anything, take away everything at any time. And there's also a strong religious culture in that area that relies heavily on end times revelations to get people in the door. So all that stuff as a kid was terrifying. And by studying, though, the history of how people, starting to get into the histories of how did people react to natural disasters, what came of them, like did we learn things, did we adjust stuff? And also I learned that people have thought the world was ending since it started. So there's that too. And so all of that gave me a sense of understanding and control. And that's how I got hooked on history. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk, as they say. So I say all that because when I go through this topic, I don't mean any of it voyeuristically. I do not mean to make light, even though I may say things like, this is cool because it's fascinating to me. I don't mean to make light of the immense tragedies that have been felt here, but it's good, interesting stuff. So if I use any language that may seem that way, just know it comes from a place of deep respect for the topic. And we will not, I'm not going to talk about individual stories of any kind of tragedies or injuries or any of that kind of stuff. We're going to stay pretty high level on that. So it's a picture I took. So, I'm really into our history and architecture, right? But like I said, natural disasters are my gateway drug to history. But we're not here to talk about any of that stuff. We're only going to focus on St. Louis's favorite natural disaster, the one we're really, really good at, which is tornadoes. Just a few statistics. The St. Louis metropolitan area has had more tornado fatalities in modern history than any other city in the U.S. We are the location of the costliest tornado of all time, which we're going to talk about, the 1896 Great Cyclone. It's still, even now, even after Joplin, all of that, that's still the costliest tornado. And it's the third deadliest tornado of all time. And we have another tornado that was the third costliest of all time in 1927. There was a devastating tornado in 1959, 1967, and 2011, we all remember, and as well as lots more that were less devastating but constant. And the reason why that we are is that, and yes, I am totally aware that this is not, I figured you guys all know what the United States looks like. And so when I went looking for a historic map, I was like, this one looks interesting because it had some fun graphics on there. So the reason we have so many tornadoes here is that we are located right here in the middle, but we're not just in the middle of the country. We're in the middle of, North Pole to equatorial, latitudes. So we're in those middle latitudes, which means that we are affected by the warm air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, as well as cold air coming down from Canada. And those things, they don't like to get along, and they smush up against each other and make storms all the time, and something, it's unstable and lots of stuff happens. There's a concept of tornado alley, but if you look at a visual, there is no tornado alley. Like tornadoes occur pretty much everywhere west of the Rockies, and they are concentrated in the Midwest and South. And we have this idea of Kansas and Kansas and Iowa being the majority of tornadoes, and that's not true. And like the deadliest tornadoes are all in Missouri and in Tennessee and in Alabama and Mississippi. So like kind of have to shift our idea of what tornado alley really means. It's kind of a misnomer. So we're going to focus on 3 historic tornadoes that shape the city that we live in today. We're going to look at some damage photos, and we're also going to find places where we can still see their impact and how that we can feel it now, and learn what the big takeaways for each were, because each one changed St. Louis forever, and not just in a devastating way, changed it and made in a good way and contributed to history. All right, the first one, the big one, 1896. This is the big one. This is the one that is the 3rd deadliest and the most costly tornado to ever hit a U.S. city. This happened in May 27th of 1896, and taken from, I found there's this book I love. It's called An Illustrated Guide to St. Louis in 1896. It was published that year after the tornado happened. And I love their description of the tornado. It says, May 27th, 1896 will, as long as St. Louis exists as a city, be marked as the blackest of black letter days in her history. On that date, a tornado, the most destructive in its effects that is known in this country, came down upon this city and destroyed more property in less than an hour than can be replaced in years. So it happens around 5 p.m. in the evening. The day was hot and muggy. There had been predictions of storms. People knew something was up. We all know that. If those of us that live here, if you've been here for big storms, you know when they're coming, right? Like there's that feeling in the air. So this is a map of the route that the tornado took. So it drops in kind of south of Forest Park, comes into the city, and really gets wide when it gets to about Jefferson and Park. So Lafayette Square neighborhood, where most of the city's wealthy lived, that devastated the park, leveled all the trees, tore off top levels of houses. There are still houses in that area that are 2 stories when they were originally 3 stories. That you see. And then it gets to Soulard. And when it gets to Soulard, you have all of those brick warehouses, homes, factories, all of that is laid waste within about 20 minutes. So 137 people died in St. Louis and 118 died in East St. Louis. So it hops the river, and so that's when you have that total 330 deaths, you're combining St. Louis and East St. Louis. There was a 10-mile swath of devastation, and it destroyed 311 buildings. It damaged 7,200 buildings, and then for lesser damage for 1,300 buildings. So that's, astounding if you really think about it. So what comes of all that? So here are some images. So this is one I've always loved, because not only is it people surveying the damage, and it gives us insight also into life at that time. Those big wheels that you see on the left there, that's a streetcar cable station. So this would have, this is evidence that not only would it have shut down, manufacturing and things like that in the area, but it also shuts down city transportation and things that would have affected infrastructure for a while. Here we have an image of people waiting at the morgue, and the morgue was a few blocks west of where Busch Stadium is now, is where the city morgue was. It was part of a big complex of buildings. So here are people waiting to hear about loved ones or people they can't find. Again, this happens the tornado was at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's in a shift between working and home. A lot of the, and it does hit the riverfront and tears up. There's a lot of damage there as well. This is an image in Soulard. So you can just see, the way the buildings behaved. An amazing image of devastation. It hits the Eads Bridge, which the Eads Bridge was built in the 1860s, and people were always very skeptical of how strong this bridge was, and it gets hit by an F3 tornado, which even sounds like not as heavy as a F4, F5. It gets hit by this tornado, and all it does is really damage the deck on the east side. It doesn't affect the structure of the bridge whatsoever. The bridge was like, man, I don't care. Put some stones back on me. So it was totally fine structurally. But what comes of this tornado is we are given this book called The Great Cyclone. And so the tornado happens in 1896, and this is when St. Louis is the 5th largest city in the United States. So think about now if LA or Dallas or any of these, any of the big cities, if they were hit by, as they are, because we live in a world where all these natural disasters keep occurring, it's big news and people want to know about it, which is at this time, the only way you could get information anywhere would be by telegraph. And it would be, in the newspapers the next day, things like that. But there were people that lived here that realized something they had on their hands, which was this huge story. They also had the ability to photograph the damage and get firsthand accounts. And so a publishing company was very quickly organized within days after the storm called Cyclone Publishing. And Cyclone Publishing here in St. Louis went straight to work at compiling the Great Cyclone book. And so they get firsthand accounts, they have the list of the dead, and it's a fascinating list. I have some examples here in a moment. They wrote the book to describe the storm as a mythical event with a storm king and a fire king battling it out and sending off troops. And it's really, really dramatic and written in a voice that we wouldn't use now, right, in modern times. So as a piece of history, it's great. It's good reading. And so I have this version here that it has been reissued. And so it is a book that you can get copies of. It is easy to get reproductions of the book. So that's the big thing that comes from here. And as I mentioned, I was going to give some examples of the lists of the dead. Some of my favorites are, you have Louis Morris, and he was a cook aboard the steamer, the J.J. Odell. We have Dora Myers, who was 19 years old. She came from Chicago the day of the tornado. And Will Odin, a roustabout steamer from Pittsburgh. So you get just these, not just a list of the dead, but also what they were doing, where they were found. And so it's a very personal account. Also as a piece of history, you find stuff that is surprising. I'm somebody who, I've given downtown walking tours for 12 years. I thought I knew everything I could possibly know about buildings, but the Wainwright building, which is, first skyscraper and one of our big buildings downtown, has these big round porthole windows at the top. And it's got it's an office building. That's the history of it. But it turns out that in the Great Cyclone book, there is an account that those top windows were all occupied by barbers. There were barber shops up in those top windows, and they watched the tornado go across Soulard. And so that's an interesting eyewitness account that I didn't realize for the types of businesses that were up on top of that building. And check the Q&A, no, nothing yet. So again, please throw questions in there. So we're about to move on. Here's some images of some then and nows. And so this is Lafayette Park Presbyterian Church. This is, as the little thing says, corner of Lafayette Avenue and Avalon Place. This is in Lafayette Square. Church was rebuilt, as you can see, rebuilt pretty faithfully, and it is now privately owned and are condos and loft apartments. So it's a place you can live with some tornado history. This is my very favorite. We do go see this on our Soulard walking tour. If you go on that, this is the Bohemian Gymnasium in Soulard. You can see this is at 9th and Allen. You see here this bow-shaped damage where the wall has collapsed out. You see roof damage. There's a cage that was probably up here, like a little cupola type thing. And then if you look at the building now, you see that same half moon shaped repair in the brick. So I have a big screen over here, so I'm looking at it too, because I like to. So you see that repair. And so if you know what you're looking for all throughout Soulard, you can see brick repairs, and you can see how buildings were altered after the tornado. This is City Hospital number 1. City Hospital number 1 is a pretty familiar building, not this one because it was destroyed, but City Hospital number 1 was, as its name implies, it was a hospital the city owned. We first got our first city hospitals in the 1840s. That building burned. Then this is the building that replaced it, and then the tornado took a direct hit on City Hospital number 1. So again, in the Great Cyclone book, they discuss at length the heroics of the doctors, because there were no nurses there, and the doctors that were had to triage people in the hospital before they could go out into the community, and they had like 2 people to a bed and like all this stuff, and then they had to make a makeshift hospital downtown to handle all of the injured. And so this is the building that replaced that one because of the tornado. We wouldn't have this building, which is at kind of 55 and 44, where they all come together near Lafayette Park. This is now condos, but that City Hospital number 1 had to be rebuilt because of the 1896 tornado. So it's kind of a fun thing that's left behind. Soulard Market was flattened and had to be rebuilt. So the market that we see now also was something that had to be reimagined and rebuilt after the tornado. We're going to move on to our second tornado. And the second big one is 1927. So this is the next, well, this one was not as deadly as the other one. It wasn't too far behind. This killed 79 people in St. Louis. This happened on September 29th, 1927, which makes the point that, tornadoes in other parts of the country happen mainly in the spring, mainly in the fall, when there's shifts in weather patterns. In St. Louis, we have tornadoes all year. We have them on, a few years ago, we had January 1st, we have them in February, we have them in April and in the summer. So there's no rhyme, and the majority of them do happen at the spring and fall, but we do more often than other areas. We have them at odd times of the year. So this one happened Thursday, September 29th at 1:00 p.m. And it drops down just over here near Manchester Avenue and gets going when it gets to Kings Highway. Takes a jag over to Forest Park, and then you see the devastation pattern. The path that it takes on this map widens. The tornado's path was 12 miles long, 600 yards wide. Damage estimates at the time are $53 million. So incredibly damaged. I mean, it went through residential areas where there were built, factories, and also high-rise apartment buildings, and it also for some reason it took straight aim at several schools, and schools were in session because it was 1:00, and so there was Central High School in North St. Louis. They did suffer some significant casualties there of students from the direct hit. This map also that you're looking at here also includes the route, the 1896. It shades it as well. So we're looking at both tornado routes. So here's just some images of that devastation. Some more of that. So the big so what, and I mean that in a good way, it's like, so what of this tornado, and why to discuss it beyond just the big numbers and saying, oh, it did this and killed that, and blah, blah, blah. There's a cool so what that comes from this one. So the image that you're seeing here is a very familiar area if you live in St. Louis. This is the Cathedral Basilica. This is where kind of Cortex and, WashU Medical Campus, like all that kind of stuff is just to the south of that. You see a lot of big homes here that are gone now. And you have Lindell that's running here. So within a short period after the tornado in 27 happens, the Society for Engineers, the St. Louis Society for Engineering, which is still around, and the St. Louis branch of the American Institute of Architects, they get together. Someone realizes we have something amazing on our hands. We have a laboratory for buildings that you can't recreate anywhere else. We have a chance to go out and catalog how just about every building type you can imagine behaved in a tornado. And it's not just simple, well, it was damaged in a tornado can mean several things. Either the wind itself damaged the building, or debris hit the building, or the third one, which is pressure, changes in air pressure. So maybe a wall collapses when everything else looks totally fine because that was a pressure damage, not a wind damage. They have all this stuff. So they realize not only can we just look at brick houses, we can look at high-rise steel apartment buildings. How did they perform in this? Like, what kind of damage do we see depending on the velocities? How did this big stone church, all these things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to really be able to see in the real world. So they published this thing called the Report of the St. Louis Tornado, and it's fantastic. It's a really fun read. It used to be easily available online. I went to check up on it this afternoon and realized now you do have to check it out from some of the local libraries if you want to be able to read a copy of it. But it's a pretty robust 100-page report, and they detail all these different building types and how they behave depending on where they were in relation to the core of the tornado, to the wind, to all the different things. My favorite is this one, and I'll do the squinting so you don't have to. And it says 4135 Washington Boulevard, a tornado freak. The second building from the right was 3 stories high. The second floor disappeared, and the illustration shows the third story resting upon the first. So in that line of buildings, they all kind of behave differently, right? Like some of them were caved in, but on that one, the whole level of the building left, but the top stayed and dropped down. So, I mean, and you see that one on the lower left there, again, where pressure or something has caused a wall to collapse, and you can see into the buildings. And what's interesting about reading this report too is it's not just something that they're, it's not, I mean, it is, it's very technical and straightforward, but you also see lots of bias in there towards local builders and architects. And you will see little notes that in there, they're like, oh, this, as we can see, buildings built by so-and-so seem to have held up really well. So you have the technical information, but you also see some very interesting bias within the some more personal notes inside. I love, this is from a paper in Oregon from 1927, and I find it, as modern citizens of the world and the natural disasters that we have witnessed, in the last decade or two, I find this interesting that the floods and tornadoes of 1927, the worst year in Red Cross history, right? And it's so naive, it's so innocent. There's a lot coming, Red Cross. So I just found this to find interesting stories about these events in other cities. Checking the Q&A, see if you guys have had any questions for me yet. Save them up for the end. The last tornado, the last of the 3 tornadoes that we're going to talk about is this one, the 1959 tornado. And I include the 59 tornado. It is one of the deadliest. 21 people died in this one because it has several impacts on modern St. Louis life that you wouldn't think about. One is when we do virtual tours. One of my virtual tours talks about these tornadoes as well as a whole bunch of other stuff. And so many times we have people that witnessed this tornado. They were kids when this happened, or one woman was pregnant with her first child when this tornado happened, remembered having to take cover. And so we get lots of personal stories. So families that are from here have personal connections to this tornado. And so you're seeing the path that it took, pretty long stretch. It wasn't until it got to like Webster Groves and Maplewood that it really started causing some damage in the city. Here's some images of, the radio tower that has fallen. That's something that you hear a lot when people that lived through this or know a lot about this tornado, they almost always reference this radio tower that was knocked over because it was one of the main radio stations, and that it's a big deal that they were knocked out. So this one, it was a F4. It is not there was an F4 in 2011 that hit St. Louis. So before that, this was, one of the few F4s that have hit the city. They did not have sirens used, which is an interesting little footnote of this. So the tornado hits in the middle of the night. It was part of a larger system of storms that had been going for about a day and a half, been coming across the Midwest. This system spawned 17 tornadoes over 2 days, but all of the fatalities were in St. Louis. So even though it's happening in all of the other places, we suffered the most of the damage. According to the Weather Bureau, it was one of those days that the weather was wrong, right? The weather was not correct. It's February and it's 63 degrees and muggy at midnight. So something is off, or, they know something's going on. The temperature drops very quickly after midnight, and that's when the storm starts to move through. By the end, there were 47 homes destroyed, 245 with major damage, and then 1,600 more with minor damage. It caused 1,400 people to be homeless. It also spurred huge donations. Like people were, big people organizing to help their neighbors out and to give donations. And citizens donated $240,000 to the Red Cross. Estimates of the total destruction ran into about $12 million in 1927 money. So a couple of things that are interesting. One is the siren thing that I mentioned. So the Weather Bureau, they saw a little something on their radar was 1959. So their radar was not as modern as it would be now, of course, but they do have weather radar, and they see something on it. Looks like a little wispy tail is how it's described. And so they're pretty sure they might be seeing a tornado. And they think at first like this might be a tornado. They could use the public siren system. We had a public siren system, but it was for the Cold War. That's the purpose of that siren system at the time. So they decide not to issue a tornado warning. Like on the radio, there's no tornado warning that goes out because they're not quite sure, and they didn't want to scare everybody. Also, the mayor is the one that suggested, when they figure out something might be going on, the mayor, Raymond Tucker, he suggests using air raid sirens, but the local civil defense chief said it would produce a war scare. And so at this point, they've got the sirens. They have a way to wake everybody up because it's in the middle of the night, and they don't use it because that's not what they're for. It's just a crazy way to think of having this tool that you could use and not using it. The St. Louis, we would not have weather sirens until 1967. And that was that happened in May of 1967, which was 3 months after 3 people were killed by a tornado that struck North St. Louis County. So, and since then, over 24 people have been killed in tornadoes in St. Louis and the surrounding counties since then. So the sirens don't get started to use until 1967. Q&A. Okay. So another big piece, here's that radio tower, that image in the lower left, the radio tower that people remember so fondly, or so vividly. Also the arena, where the sports arena where the Blues hockey team used to play. I have not lived in St. Louis while there was an arena. It's been gone the whole time I've been here, so it's just history to me. But it tore the roof off the top. That was a huge deal. And here's the Post-Dispatch coverage the next day. The other thing that this tornado spurs, it's a big piece of St. Louis history, is the biggest area of damage was Boyle and Olive in the Central West End. And that's where the most deaths occur, the most physical damage occurs. And that was already a nightlife district. It wasn't called anything specific, but it was a nightlife district. There were, although it was more of a red light district at the time, there were clubs, there were things in this area. So it was so badly hit that people started coming to see the damage, to see for themselves this horrific damage. And suddenly it becomes one of the best known areas in the city. So then you also have insurance money that starts to come in for the building owners. So they quickly get a lot of insurance money to repair and improve these buildings. And there's more businesses and more bars and more restaurants. So then they start calling it Gaslight Square. And so you have this rebirth of this nightlife area that becomes, by the summer of 1960, so a year later, Gaslight Square is this huge, the hottest entertainment, spot in town. There's these old timey lights up. It has lots of great atmosphere, and a place where there are people out and about. And of course, anyone that lived in St. Louis at the time, it's a big piece of their nostalgic history of St. Louis. So those are things that came from that 1959 tornado. So now I'm happy to open up the floor for questions if you have them, or any comments on any of the stuff that we just discussed. Like I said, this is one of my favorite topics, so I can, if you have questions that you don't want to ask in this format, you can email me directly, and I'm happy to research or find out anything. And my email, if you want to, is aclark@mohistory.org. Let's see, I do see someone has their hand raised, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Hannah can, I don't think I have the ability to let that hand raise do something. So if you want to put your question in here, or can they ask it out loud? I'm not sure what the hand raising does.
Yeah, so if they want to ask it out loud, we don't have that big of a group on right now. Feel free to do that, or
I've given them permission. They just need to unmute themselves.
Okay, great.
All right, so maybe they've changed their mind by asking the question. Again, like I said, you can always email me at aclark@mohistory.org. And I guess that wraps us up the topic. If we don't have any questions, I'm going to move us on to so Hannah, I'll hand the mic back over to you. And here's there you go.
Great. Well, thank you everyone so much for attending. This was a really interesting talk, Amanda. So thank you so much. And before we officially sign off, I want to take a moment to remind you of some of our upcoming events. And our next History on Tap is St. Louis Drag History. And that's Tuesday, June 22nd, and it starts at 6. So it's free again. We're still virtual for now. Hopefully in the future that can change. You can register online like usual for all the other events, or follow the event on our Facebook page. And we'll join Maxi Glamour, a local drag artist and LGBTQIA activist, for a fascinating look at the history of drag in St. Louis. So without further ado, I guess that's it. So everyone have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye.